right, 60 days to raise $25,000, was enrolled in 16 credits, and still was working at Snapshot.
This is the founder of Endure Sport Nutrition, Anja Westhues. She created a 3-step nutritional system for avid runners like herself and successfully completed a $25,000 Kickstarter campaign while studying at NYU. We asked Anja about what it's like to start a company while being in college and what she sees the future for her business now that she's graduated.
Anja, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. Thank you so much for spending the time. We'd love to start by just talking about your background. This is going to be an episode where we get into, kind of what it's like to be a founder in the current age.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to talk as much about the retrospect, but we are going to start, as always, with who you are. So I guess that is in retrospect. So tell us, Anja, tell us about yourself. You started college when it was still in COVID times, right?
Yes. So my name is Anja Westhues. I'm a recent graduate of NYU Gallatin, as you just mentioned. I studied food and beverage marketing and minored in food studies, so very much interested in food and how it interacts with culture. I graduated in 2020, so my high school graduation was a drive-through, and
Wow.
I won't bore you with the details because it's an overdone story at this point. But very strange not to really get closure on that chapter of my life. And I started attending college at a school called Occidental College, which is located in LA. I'm from Boston, and the school was entirely remote my first year, so I spent the entire first year taking classes on a time difference.
Oh, wow.
Took a lot of classes in politics and kind of figured out that wasn't really what I wanted to do. If I'd gone to that school, I think I would have been pursuing environmental policy and politics as a double major. But I took a class my freshman year in urban and environmental policy, and we had a unit on food policy. And that really just struck a chord with me, and I was really interested in kind of pursuing that specifically. That wasn't really a course of study at Occidental or most colleges, honestly, but I applied to Gallatin, which is the school that allows you to design your own course of study. And when I initially applied, I was planning on going that policy route or potentially law school. And as most Gallatin students do, I started taking some classes, kind of realized, policy, law, not really for me. What do I want to do with this? Was kind of lost for a year or so, was working part-time at a running store, which plays into all of this a little bit later. And then eventually studied in Paris my junior year, came back, and it kind of all clicked at once. I was like, food is really fascinating, these new age brands. There's all these new CPG brands that are trying to challenge the landscape, challenge these big players that have such a big stake in the game, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all these companies. And I also obviously was working at that running store, and I'd always just heard from customers, hey, I need to buy nutrition for my first marathon, or I need to buy nutrition because I'm going to start running longer distances. What do you recommend that won't upset my stomach? And this was something I heard hundreds of times. And coming from the sales side, I'd always be like, hey, try 4 or 5 different brands, see what works the best for you. But when you think about how many runners that there are, pivoting to kind of what's gonna bother you the least is not really a great way to look at it. So I kind of had that passion for food and new brands and passion for running, and kind of it all just kind of, I don't know. I was on a walk one day in my hometown in January of 2023, I think. And that's when it kind of just all hit, and I just kind of hit the ground running immediately. Didn't really spend too much time ruminating on, hey, I'm only 21, which in retrospect, maybe I should have thought a little more about, but I was like, I'm going to do this now. And here we are now. Yeah.
I think the concept of a self-walking meeting, a meeting where you are walking with yourself, and you're having that internal discussion, that internal conversation about what you want to do with your life is so important. And, people always think that, it's like an aha moment when you think about what you want your startup to be. But in reality, it's that moment is coming at an individual time, but it's the sum of years and years and years of experiences. And even if you are deciding that at 20 or 21 years old, it is still the accumulation of so many years of your studies and your day-to-day experiences. And so that aha moment while you're walking isn't really just a singular moment. It's a consummation of so many different things.
Yeah, for sure.
To touch up on your background, you've mentioned that you worked at the running store in Brooklyn. You have exceptional experience in a lot of jobs, whether if it's internships, if it's not internships, it's jobs like that. If it's not that, you started own ventures and publications as well. How did you develop this kind of hustler mindset?
To be honest, had a few part-time jobs in high school just to like have some spending money. And then during the pandemic, I guess, actually, so the summer of 2020, there were not a lot of places hiring for like people to come work because it was the pandemic and there was not a lot of demand. So I started, my friend at the time, her mom was a long distance cyclist and just mentioned that there was a running store hiring. Then worked at a running store in Boston for a year, and I just really, it's hard to describe. It's a very like niche thing that we would do at this store. We would fit customers for shoes, really get to know people one-on-one, talk to them for 30 or so minutes. And it was just like, it became a passion of mine. It was like a social outlet in a lot of ways during the pandemic, and then moving out, it was just something I knew how to do. So that was how I got into like the running retail kind of stuff and worked in that for about 3 years. And then when it comes to just like general hustler mindset, I guess you could call it, I just have a lot of passions. And like, I think that's also why I loved and thrived at Gallatin so much, is because it really allows you to explore all these different hobbies and interests and passions you have and find the ways they intersect. And I think that also played a lot into my building of Endure. So everything that I've done up until this point, it has either been for immediate passion or like passion bridged with need for money, I guess. But I think that, yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question. Yeah.
I think it totally does. And it's like the context of like doing an internship, right, while you're still in school, it seems like very daunting to somebody that just starting college, I feel like, because when you're just starting, you may not be doing, a million things at once. You're just trying to get your foot into the door in a lot of different places. But I guess I just want to ask you then, as someone with so much experience, like, when do you think is the right time? So if we have any listeners that are just starting college or something like that, when do you think is the right time to, start the whole internship process?
I would say like summer before your junior year. I think summer internships you can start, actually, let me rephrase. Summer internships I think is pretty typical to start earlier in college. I think during school, like junior year for me was when I started having a serious internship during school, was when I got back from Paris. It was second semester. And I've had an internship or like job contracted position ever since during school.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we could pivot to what Endure is, can you in layman's terms tell us what it's trying to achieve and inspiration behind that process?
For sure. So Endure is a whole food-based fueling nutrition system for runners and endurance athletes. We have 3 products that have been developed up until this point. So we have a product for before a workout called Brace. We have a product for during a workout called Pace, and a product for after a workout called Ace. And these all serve different nutritional needs for the endurance athlete. The reason that there's this whole system is because I interviewed about 200 or so runners who were either newer runners or like had been in the sport for decades. And something that came up specifically more so with the newer runners was just the lack of education around proper fueling when you're getting into these kinds of events. If you didn't grow up in a sports background, for example, there's a lot of people that sign up for half or full marathons when they become adults, and maybe they don't know all the nutritional nuances of what they should be eating before and like what's not going to upset their stomach, what they can stomach during, or like what they need to properly recover after. So the whole like fun little not gamified, but like the rhyming names just to like make it cohesive. It's going to be eventually sold as an entire system. And that was what the Kickstarter was kind of based around. The product that I've done most of the sampling and testing with is that Ace product. So I was making that in a commercial kitchen space last summer. Did a bunch of sampling events at run clubs, gyms, all these places. And then that's the one that we're going to be initially launching with now. So I'm working with a manufacturer in Texas.
Wow.
We have a pre-order live on our website right now. And eventually, as we grow, we'll be able to sell that entire system. But having one product to start is definitely the easiest way to go, for sure.
Starting with a targeted product, I think, is always so important. And so in the context of your conversations with those 200 runners, how did you know what exactly, so you're a first-time founder, right?
Yes, yeah.
So how did you know exactly what to ask them, right? Because, the context of like finding your target market, which is in run clubs, like you said, that's how you found the people, is in run clubs?
Yes, so yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, go on.
Yeah, okay. So if they weren't in run clubs, then how did you find these 200 people? But secondly, like, how did you know what you should ask them on a survey? Because surveying is obviously so important. But how did you know exactly what you should ask them? Because there's so many components, especially with a physical product. There's taste, there's the performance. How did you know where you should start with that?
So I think that one of the pros of me starting this venture while still being a university student was all the resources that NYU had to offer. So last May, so about a year ago at this point, I participated in the Entrepreneurship Center's Startup Sprint, which was basically 2 weeks of like very intensive coaching and feedback and all these things. And we had to, during those 2 weeks alone, had to interview, oh my gosh, it was like 50 people. It was something,
Wow.
it was a lot of people. And I had a partner with me at the time helping me do these interviews, but we had to basically not allude to what we were actually building and just get at the root of the problem and find like the cohesive themes or consistent themes across different ages and genders and demographics and all of that. So I had a lot of connections in the running space because of my previous job. So I asked my old manager to introduce me to people who had worked there before me, people who she may have known at other locations of the store. So I really leveraged a lot of my connections there. And then we just did some like very basic stuff. We went to the West Side Highway with a sign that was like, tell me about your nutrition system, and just sat there and like waited for people to come. We did that in Washington Square Park too. And I think that depending on the conversation, I started out the same way with everyone. I was like, are you training for something right now? I really tried to make it very casual. And I was like, what products did you use in your first marathon? Did you use that on your second marathon? What influence, like I did kind of like hint at those. I was like, oh, like what influences, like why that brand over this brand, for example. And I never really explicitly said what I was working on until after the conversation was over, because I really just wanted to get at those really like those pain points, if you want to call them that. I kind of think that's a silly term, but those pain points of those athletes and like what was not serving them on the market right now. And then from there, I was able to draw a lot of really striking numbers and statistics out of that. Like it was something like 85% of people were actively looking for something new on their next training cycle. Like,
wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of really great insights from that I had observed working in the stores, but never really had numbers or like consistent like interviews to pull from and back it up.
So it's what I'm seeing is a scientific method in action. I mean, this is not much different from what we learned in, middle school science or something. It's hypothesis, right? You gained that from your experience working at the run club, and then you tested it. You tested it through conversation, and then you ended up testing out the product. What did some of those initial kind of product tests look like?
I mean, so as I mentioned, I was making them myself. So the first, oh my gosh, like the first couple, it was like a fitness studio in New York called Mile High Run Club, and it's basically like if you're familiar with Barry's, it's just Barry's minus the weights. So it's just like a interval running gym, and there's a lot of serious runners that go there because you get a decent amount of miles out of the class. So I went there and I did some sampling. I cut the bars up into pieces. I did do some in Washington Square Park actually, like earlier. I did a comparison of RX bar cut up and Endure cut up and kind of just like shuffled them around, and I wanted to see if people could like have a strong preference over one or the other and like what. And to be honest, a lot of people preferred Endure. I'm not gonna like pat myself on the back too much, but they thought it was like, oh, this is like really fresh. I'm like, yeah, that's not RX bar. They're like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah.
So did you tell them it was RX bar at first?
Well, I just said I have this bar, and they're like, oh, this looks like an RX bar. And I didn't like correct them per se. But yeah, it was like, that was like kind of nice to know that the flavor was there. And then I have a friend who has she runs a running club with like 200 people that come. So I sampled there and just cut the bars up into pieces. And I did a lot of that during the Kickstarter as well.
How did you have time to do those scientific studies and go to school and even get jobs and internships all at the same time? Can you tell us about your time management structure?
So I mean, a lot of that interviewing was done not actively during school. So that was last summer primarily, like right when school had let out. I don't think I would have been able to do like all those interviews while being in classes and having my internship. I did work an internship during all of this. I was with a food and beverage publication called Snack Shot for about 14 months, which also helped open a lot of doors for me. And she gave me a lot of work to actually do. And that was able to really accelerate, I think, my growth and professional skills. And then, so I was doing Snack Shot and a lot of Endure stuff last summer. Really where it gets crazy was last fall when I launched the Kickstarter and was raising money for the Kickstarter. I had 60 days to raise $25,000, was enrolled in 16 credits, and still was working at Snack Shot. And to be honest, I did my best with the time management. Oh, and I had a part-time job at Barry's. All of that going on. And I wanted, like, my number one tip with time management is just prioritization. I'm like very big on planners. I write out my to-do list every single morning, and it's like such a silly answer, but that's really it. And you have to also be okay with saying no sometimes. So when it comes to my social life during that time, pretty slim. And that I just had to kind of be okay with that, because I mean, I had things I really wanted to achieve and I was on a time crunch, and I just had to kind of say to my friends, hey, I'll catch up with you guys soon. And it's just one of those things that you can't have it all, and you have to just kind of accept that and know also when to step back, know when to rest a little bit so you can't keep going, rather than just have a complete breakdown and have to stop. So yeah, that's my advice there. I don't know if that's really that uplifting.
It's incredibly helpful. Not
Yeah.
all startup advice has to be uplifting. I
Yeah.
think that that's like a certainty. And so you just telling it how it is. And also the fact that this all happened last summer, like you said, this is all within a year. I think that shows exactly what we're kind of trying to do here, is to showcase the stories of people that are in it right now. And Anja, you're in it right now. Something that is in the past tense, though, is your Kickstarter campaign.
Yes.
And so you successfully raised $25,000 in Kickstarter, fully backed. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you walk us through that entire process? So not just the decision to crowdfund, but also even why Kickstarter specifically versus other platforms.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, crowdfunding at my age and stage of professional life just made the most sense. Running is such a community-oriented sport. There's so many run clubs specifically in New York, and it's so easy to kind of get to your target market, target customers, all of that. So I'd already been talking to a lot of people about what I was building, and already had a lot of ideas around like the marketing behind it, who I was going to be talking to. I did some casual conversations with some angel investors, and it just didn't seem like it was going to be something that I didn't really have the, like, in raising funds in that sense is like a full-time job, and a lot of people say that, and I didn't have the time for that, honestly. And Kickstarter in itself is also kind of a full-time job, so I guess I picked my full-time job. But yeah, so I decided to raise on Kickstarter specifically because, to be honest, I think it's just the most well-known crowdfunding platform and has the highest credibility. One thing I will just note about Kickstarter, though, versus something like Indiegogo, or there's a few other ones that are a bit smaller, is that Kickstarter is an all or nothing platform, and that really did intensify the stress, I think, of all of it. In retrospect, I might have explored other options, honestly. I think that having that intensive, I have to raise this or I get nothing, even though I'd already made like thousands of dollars, if I didn't fill that goal, I would get nothing, was very stressful. And I think that even though Indiegogo may not have like the same, I don't know, appeal, you get what you raise, which is definitely something that I look back on and maybe I would have done a little differently.
Can we talk about the distribution model right now? Right now, it's a pre-order on e-commerce. Do you have any plans on going retail in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, some of my backers actually were retail stores. So I had to get a little creative when I was looking to fill in that goal. So I went to one of my old part-time jobs, pitched them on the business. They put in an order for when it would be available, and did that with another store as well. So when it launches, it will be in those two stores. And then it also, I've been having some conversations lately with some more like consumer, like newer consumer brand kind of stores that are platforming these smaller brands that don't have wide distribution. But aside from that, right now, it's going to stay relatively lean in terms of how many physical stores I'll be in, just because the margins aren't great when you're going into retail as a consumer good, and then the rest of it will be online.
Okay. Right now, you go on the Indoor website and you pre-order it, right? But instead of pre-ordering, if you're going to a store, you're seeing the Indoor brand next to all the other brands, right? And you're kind of not in control of that brand experience.
Yes.
And a lot of younger brands prefer to be in control of the experience while being online. So, and they'll opt to stay online only because of the fact that they control the experience, what the website looks like and things like that. So if you could maybe just like walk through, if you've thought of that, I think that would be really helpful, because for a young brand, staying in control of the brand seems to be, quite important.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with you that it's important, but also at the end of the day, I do want to get it into as many hands and have it be seen in the places where my customers are going. And some of my customers might not be online. Some of my customers might be going into these running stores, and I know that firsthand from being in there, and people would come in and they'd be like, I'm starting running, I need help. So I know that there's a lot of people who go directly to humans versus the internet for that kind of resource. So I definitely I think that even though maybe they're not perceiving Endure in the way that I would see Endure being perceived, at the same time, I don't want to just not put it there in the pursuit of that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said your goal is to reach as many hands as possible, but what are other milestones and what is the dream outcome that you foresee for Endure?
For Endure, I mean, so something that I've changed a little bit over the course of building this business is who my target market's gotten more and more niche, I think. So when I first did a lot of these interviews, it was just marathon runners. It was just health conscious marathon runners, which if you're running a marathon, you're probably semi health conscious. That's a lot of time to be running. And as I've kind of refined that a little bit more and I've done more, I wouldn't call them formal interviews, but just had more conversations with a lot of people, I've realized that there's not really a product that has prioritizes both micro and macro nutrients on the same scale. So there's a lot of products that are better for you, use whole food ingredients, but maybe they don't prioritize protein in the same way. They don't balance carbs and protein in the same way. And I think that there's a big gap in the market for something that does both of those things and specifically actually markets to women to fuel their bodies for sport, because there's so many products on the market that are telling women to be smaller, telling women to eat less, move more, all these things. And I think that running specifically can be such an empowering sport. And I think that there should be more brands that are telling women to properly fuel, properly recover, eat before, eat during, eat after, just eat enough to perform well. So to answer your question, my target has kind of refined more into this woman marathoner, maybe earlier on in her athletic journey.
That was amazing customer
Yeah.
segmentation. And I
Thank
could
you.
tell that you've got to that through actually having people not only talking to people about the product, but also having people literally try the product and even probably talking about the effects that the product has had on their bodies, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what I'm interested now is just to get into maybe even a little bit more of the specifics. I mean, you are somebody that wears so many hats, clearly. I can tell that you're becoming an expert in branding, you're becoming an expert in supply chain and logistics. How did you even learn about, macros and micros, and not only just learning about them for a test, but also being able to apply them to the creation of a physical product that is food safe too?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been interested in health and wellness and nutrition. I worked with a sports nutritionist for a brief period in high school, and that kind of opened my eyes to all of that.
In high school?
In high school, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
But as I transitioned into college, I took some classes in nutrition. And then also as I built this brand, I have gotten some consulting and contracted help from people who are actually accredited in the field. So I had a sports nutritionist kind of look over all the labels. I had a food scientist help with the food safety and just making sure that the macros were actually how I was calculating them to be. So I've gotten some help with that as well. But people are aware of I think there's more, especially with the internet, people are becoming more and more aware of these basic nutrition terms. And I think that there are a lot of brands that aren't really tapping into that yet. So I think that we're kind of maybe potentially early and this space for runners.
We see a huge growing trend in running and Gen Z. Partly, you could say it's because of Strava, the community building behind it. Do you think it has something to do with the lack of socializing within COVID? And right now we're in a period after that. If you could, have some personal insight on that.
Yeah, so I think you kind of hit it on the head with that. I think that running, I've always been a big believer in the fact that in some ways, it's one of the easiest sports to kind of take up. All you really need is a decent pair of shoes, and you can kind of get started. Obviously, a lot of people take it much more seriously than that, and they buy all this expensive gear, but whatever. I think that post-COVID and during COVID, actually, let me backtrack. During COVID, all the gyms were closed, and a lot of people were looking for alternative ways to become active. So I think a lot of people did take up running and long-distance cycling and these events and sports that didn't necessarily require all this equipment, and they could do outside where they could not have to wear a mask when they were working out, even when gyms were open and stuff like that. And then I think post-COVID, particularly in New York, but in a lot of metropolitan cities, there's been so many run clubs that have popped up as just alternative ways to meet people, to socialize. Drinking is less popular than it used to be, so people are maybe not wanting to go to bars as much. They're wanting to find other ways to meet people that are a little bit more active and better for you. So there are so many run clubs in the city. I can't even keep track at this point. Like personally, I even go to like 5.
Wow.
And that's like, that's just me. Like, and I know that there's dozens more that I could go to if I wanted. And I think that's also New York specific, but in other cities as well. Like I freelance with other companies as well, just to like pay bills. And we had a partnership a few months ago we had like a virtual 5K. So we partnered with run clubs across the country, and just doing that research, I was even, for myself, just even appalled with how many there are in places like LA, places in the Midwest, DC, all these different cities. There's so many run clubs. So I think it's definitely a growing trend, and I think it will continue to grow as well.
And so I think that creates like a natural opportunity for the Endure brand to find itself into the world of community building, right? Can you talk through your kind of strategy of like what the Endure community could look like in the future? Because it's not just about, I could already tell, it's not just about people buying these bars.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think that this is an idea that I've kind of tabled, but once we launch, I'm definitely going to bring back is the Endure Run Club, which sounds like it sounds like a very crowded market, and it is a crowded market. But I think that gathering around like a common product or brand that you're using, and I'm going to definitely like have samples. People like founding members of the Run Club will basically get to get product to give out to their friends and things like that. And I think that getting in on a ground level of a brand is always really cool and exciting. Like I think a lot about Outdoor Voices and how they launched they were really big in like 2016, 2017, where they do a lot of these like experiential marketing events. They'd have free yoga classes, and if you came, you got a free hat and things like that. And I think that, yes, at the end of the day, it's about brand awareness, and it's about like making sure people associate the right activities with the brand, and like they're getting to meet people, but also it's about the brand, but it's also about like the experience surrounding it. And I think that feeds in really well to Endure.
Yeah, of course. It's not just about the product. It's never just about the product. I mean, even in the physical product world, even in the world where you are even eating a product, it's not just about the product. It's about the feeling that you get. And even that is not just related back to the taste. It's why you bought something in the first place, especially when we're talking about a physical product, is never because of what the product actually does or what it tastes like. It's because of what it looked like on the shelf and what motivated your emotions to purchase it. And with you right here, this product, Endure, you're marketing a 3-step solution. You're marketing it through being out on the ground. I'm interested in understanding your kind of philosophy for where this could go long term beyond even just selling bars. Have you thought of that?
I mean, yes, it also depends on how the initial launch goes, but yes.
Right. That's a bit far down the road.
Yeah.
I think I got ahead of myself there a little bit.
Touch back on your focus on women in sports. According to Strava in 2023, women under 25 is the fastest growing community. Why do you think this is the case?
I think that it's a lot of these people who maybe want to meet people and get outside and work out rather than go pay $40 for a workout class in New York, or go have to sit in a stuffy gym during the summer. I think that running is just a really great outlet to be outside, meet people, and stay active at the same time. And there's not many activities that you can really do that with. Like being in New York, you could get into long distance biking, but like then you have to store a bike.
Yeah.
And you have to get all the equipment necessary for biking. And then aside from that, there's not many other outdoor activities. I mean, rowing, also very hard to do in New York. Like, I know this is New York specific, and I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who's living here, but I think that running is the easiest sport to take up across the country.
And to follow up on that, in a 2021 study, over half of Gen Zs track nutrition. Is it because of just the increase on the health information available online, or just the overall health conscious? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's the two kind of mixed. I think during COVID, people just became a lot more wellness aware, health conscious around what they were eating. And there was just a lot more information. TikTok, I think, played a huge role in that. People are able to make these very quick, digestible videos where they explain concepts. And then if you hear something that you're potentially interested in looking up more about, you can easily fall down a TikTok rabbit hole or an Instagram or a Reddit rabbit hole even. And I think that there's just such a plethora of information now that's available to us on the internet. And it's like, even since I was in high school, it's been on like this steep incline. And I think that's honestly why I think that people are just maybe didn't get the nutrition education they should have maybe gotten growing up. And they're kind of looking at themselves now and they're trying to figure out how to properly fuel themselves.
Yeah. Do you think that this trend is going to stay? Like as Gen Z gets older?
I mean, I think honestly, who knows? But I think that based on the fact that we're in this very kind of malleable state of life, and a lot of myself, I'm 22 now, we're adopting habits that potentially, like if people start tracking nutrition or paying attention, I guess I should say, to nutrition and exercise now, the likelihood of that like continuing for decades, I think is pretty high. It all depends also, though, I will say, like what's fueling it. Like if it's coming from a place of insecurity, maybe that's not really a sustainable thing and they shouldn't potentially be doing that longer term. But if it's really coming from a place of empowerment, I think that we're forming habits that will inform decades to come.
And those habits, if they did stem, let's say, from information online, do we think that the future of social media could be, adjusted perhaps to include, statistics that will include health and wellness, or I guess not statistics, but include, outlets of showcasing health and wellness, even on the day-to-day, right? So if somebody wants to become their own version of a indoor ambassador, right? Mm-hmm. Not that they're like a part of the company, but if they wanted to, let's say, just showcase that they're trying the product online, do you think that this generation is more likely to, be an advocate for products like Indoor?
I think that I'm also speaking because my TikTok algorithm right now is like all over TikTok Shop and like people becoming their own like affiliate, whatever. So I think that there's this new kind of market for, I don't want to say Endure specifically. I mean, I have no intentions of really building that out with Endure at a serious capacity, but I think that like this idea of speaking on products that, like influencers, for example, they've always existed at some capacity, but the level of stuff that is pushed on us on a daily basis online now is insane. I think that like I log on to this app and there's every other video, it's someone either explicitly trying to sell me something or it's like they're talking about a product, but it's linked at the bottom. And I think it's good and it's bad. I think that it's a lot of confusion about what's good and bad. And that's also why I don't think that I want to necessarily invest in like these smaller scale affiliate marketing structures, just because I think that the motivation behind it sometimes is very obvious and you want it to be the right people speaking on your mm-hmm. product rather than just trying to make a quick dollar.
You're building a genuine brand, Anja,
yes.
And you're like hyper aware of that to the point where you're saying now, you just did a Kickstarter campaign, you're trying to get your first customers, but even now you're saying, I'm not just going to let anybody promote this product.
Yeah.
You're aware of that from such an early stage. And I think that puts you really ahead. In the context of doing social good through entrepreneurship, this is a concept that I'm very much interested in talking mm-hmm. about. For me, you are totally a social entrepreneur. You're someone that is helping people improve their day-to-day lives, improving their health, helping people with longevity, and bringing people into the next generation of health and wellness. If that's not being a social entrepreneur, I don't know what is. But would you consider yourself to be a social entrepreneur?
I would say so. One other thing about Endure that I don't put at the forefront of the brand because I don't like when brands do this is, let me backtrack. I think that there's so many brands that exist on the market that are trying to market themselves as sustainable, mm-hmm. even when they're really not. Maybe they use like recycled something or like they have one ingredient that's B Corp certified or something like that. But I think that there's so many brands that do that as a marketing ploy, and I don't think that's really ethical. I don't think that's right. I think that people should know, like, I don't know, they can figure out on their own if it's a product that's really good for the planet or good for the general good. And Endure uses a blend of protein, one of which is cricket protein, which if you're unaware or a little weirded out by that, it is a very nutrient dense form of protein, incredibly less processed than most of the protein powders that we can buy, less processed than pea protein, whey protein, all of that, and has so much B12, so much iron, and 99% fewer emissions than whey protein does. But I wouldn't slap that on the front of the label. I think that's something that I like to talk about. I do think that people should be aware of it, but I wouldn't call it a sustainable product because we still use plastic in our packaging. Mm-hmm. So there's like pros and cons to everything. There's trade-offs. But I think that I will say that I definitely was prioritizing, as I mentioned earlier, like the micro and macronutrients of the product and like making that easy for people to take, making that easy for people to take on the go, implement into their training. And I would say that's doing a social good. I mean, I don't want to like plaster that on my forehead. I wouldn't I don't deserve an award for that. But I think that if you're starting something new and it's not doing some form of social good, why are you starting something?
I would agree completely. And, right now you just spoke about the concept of greenwashing, and greenwashing is when something, as Anja explained, when something seems like it is green or it is sustainable or the company is marketing it to be that, when in reality it is not. It's a massive problem and exists in so many industries, especially in the plastic industry. I think it's great that you're hyper aware of that. Could you see, your kind of ability to invest in sustainable packaging or something like that, changing as you are able to fund the business a bit better over time?
For sure. I think that's something like as soon as the funds are available, I'm going to look into compostable packaging, hopefully home compostable packaging, not just industrial. But it's too expensive at this stage, but definitely longer term.
Yeah, and for, consumers out there, like give the young brands a chance. Like, especially when they're being as genuine as Anja is, right? Like, give them a chance, right? They're being upfront, as long as they're not saying it's 100% not plastic, as long as they're not saying that it's 100% not plastic when it is plastic, give them a chance at first. Just because it's not plastic at first doesn't mean it can't be in the future, especially when you have a brand that's able to tell its story and let you know, as Anja just did, that one day the funds could be able to be there to make that change. I think that that's important. In the end, small brands have to be supported. So everyone's got to start somewhere.
As we wind down, I was wanting to ask, what are the top lessons you've learned as a student entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier when I was talking about time management, but I think that your why in all aspects of your life always needs to be clear. If you're just doing things with no like real purpose or intention behind it, the result is not going to be there. So I've always done things that I'm passionate about, and I think that everyone should kind of live their lives that way if they can. Yeah, I think that's the number one thing that I've kind of taken from my experience as a student entrepreneur, and I continue to take with me as I've transitioned out of school and into a more like working life, I guess you could call it.
And so how do you think that your why changes over time? Because people's why when they're first beginning their academic journey might be different from when they're ending their academic journey. When did you know, did yours change? And if you did, when did you know?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't know if my why has changed too much. I mean, the path that I've been pursuing it on has changed a little bit, I would say. But at the end of the day, I just want to improve the food system for the better in some capacity. And some might argue that that's not through a food business, but I think that food businesses are going to exist and people buy products, people care about brands. And I think that changing that narrative at some capacity for the better is my intention. That's also what I've been doing with that freelancing work I talked about. I'm a community manager for small-scale, sustainably minded brands. I work with a few different clients right now, and I just want people to be able to connect with the products they're buying, understand what's better about them, and bond with a broader community.
Okay. Balancing your own company and being a student, it might be challenging. But what do you have any advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, students potentially, that are looking to start their own business?
This might be controversial. I would say don't overthink it, just do it. Like, I think that I said that at the beginning, I just kind of didn't really think and I kind of jumped in. And I think that if I had overthought it, I don't think I would have done it because there's so many reasons not to start a business while you're in school. But on the flip side of that, a lot of universities have resources that you might not be able to leverage as easily once you graduate. And I also think that being in your early 20s, you just have a lot of energy. Like, I don't think that in 10 years I would be able to balance all the stuff I was doing a few months ago. And I knew that at the time, and I know that now. And it's exhausting, but it's also really fulfilling. And you make a lot of connections. There's so many just different pros to starting something early in life. And yeah, I would just say don't think too much about all the odds that are against you. Just do it, and something will happen.
And one last thing, if you had to change one thing about your journey, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I could name that I would change. I do think the Kickstarter, I could have done a little bit more preliminary outreach. That's like very specific. But I was kind of, during the campaign, I was doing a lot more work than I needed to be doing, I guess, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people do earlier outreach before the campaign goes live. But being a first-time founder, being 21, I guess, 21 when it launched, there was just not a lot of like there's so many success stories when it comes to Kickstarter, and they don't really talk about what kind of went into it.
Right.
And I think there needs to be a lot more conversation, like kind of what not to do. I had maybe one like networking call with a friend of a friend of a friend who like gave me some very basic advice, but even that wasn't really helpful. And like I think I learned a lot on the job. It happens, but I think that there's a lot of things I could have done better or differently during that.
And did you have any help from others during that process, during the Kickstarter process?
I was working with one other person at the time, yeah.
And since then, have you had a team or?
No. Everyone's been contractors or people who have just offered me free consulting or, freelancers, contractors, but no one full-time, no.
I don't know, with the progress that you've made, if you had a massive team, I would have said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. To get into, physical product creation, edible product creation, in addition to branding and marketing, and a successful Kickstarter campaign, all, primarily by yourself, I think is absolutely amazing. And this has been a really great conversation in terms of learning the specifics of what it takes to be a solopreneur in college. I mean, we haven't even talked about that concept of being a solopreneur, but I think we got the story here. That you have to be willing to do so much. And thank you so much for taking the time. Is there anything that you'd like to plug on your way out?
Yeah, I mean, my name's Anja Westhues, as I mentioned earlier. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. It's just my name, Anja Westhues. And then Endure, we have a website that hopefully by the time this goes live will hopefully actually be for sale. But if not, you can definitely pre-order. It's enduresportnutrition.com. And yeah, give us a follow, connect with us, pre-order if you're interested in trying the products. And I hope to see you out there running.
Hope to see you at the Endure Run Club whenever it happens.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anja. Really appreciate it.